Okay, good morning or good evening or good whatever time of the day it is for you right now. My name's Jim Jacobson, like it says right there, and I always forget to turn the pen on first. So, my name's Jim Jacobson, that's me right there, and you're watching Grockit's OGTV. This is the GMAT edition, so if you were logging on hoping for the SAT, that's at a different time. I want to say that it's about 12 hours from now. But you should check the schedule online if you were hoping for the SAT edition. This is the GMAT edition. We're going through the 12th edition to the guide to the test. And when we last left off, we were talking about snakes. No, we were talking about service workers and things like that. And so we are now on so we're in the reading comprehension section. We are on page 374, and we didn't start this passage last time. And so I think from now on, I'm going to try to end the session at the end of a passage. I really didn't like the way that worked out last time when we finished in the middle of a passage's questions. While it's certainly possible for us to do it that way, I think it'll be better if these individual broadcasts complete a passage, so that if somebody isn't able to tune in to the next one, they get all the questions answered on that one particular passage. Eventually these videos will all be online, so and I'm not sure what the timetable is for that, and in fact, maybe you, the listener, in the future are listening to this online, but the rest of you are listening to this live. So all the mistakes are real and unscripted. Hopefully there aren't too many. Anyway, so let's get started. We were on page, like I said, page 374, and I did it again. 374, question number 36. Oh no. Sorry, sometimes my computer just wants to run all sorts of things in the background and makes the mouse really jerky, or the pen. So I'll wait until it's done doing whatever it's doing before I try to write. Come on, you can do it. No. Wow, it really doesn't want to write right now. Let's try this again. Get rid of that. And come on, you can do it. Page. That's no good. Page. I'm trying to write 374. Oh no. Yeah, this is awesome live TV. Okay, page 3. Oh my gosh. What is going on? I don't think it's that I have too much running on in the background here. I shut down all the other stuff. Wow. Okay. And I did it again. 3. Wow, okay. Give me a moment. I'm going to shut down the pen program and try starting it up again. All right, page 370. Stop it. 374, question number 36. Oh. If this keeps up, I will just cancel the broadcast for today. Sorry for, I apologize to those of you who stayed up late or got up early to watch this, if this doesn't end up working. So, we'll just see how it goes. Anyway, so as before, I will give you a few moments, where a few moments is more like 4 minutes, to read the passage, take whatever notes you'd like to take on it, and I will do the same, and then when we are done, we will attack we have 6 questions. looks like 6 questions on um, women's oral narratives. So, 4 minutes, give or take, starting now. Okay, let's stop there. So, the notes that I've taken here reflect basically summaries. So for those of you who haven't tuned in before, I was just looking at the Facebook comments just to make sure that there weren't problems with people logging in. And, so I do these notes on the assumption that people are actually going to be reading them. The actual notes that you would take on the GMAT would not necessarily be this thorough. I mean, you could write them like this. It doesn't actually take that much longer to write a few extra words, even though it feels like every second counts. The time that it takes to write notes that help encode the information in your brain better, it can be worth it on the question. So just know though that probably real notes would have fewer words. There would be abbreviations. I might abbreviate history as hist or something like that, so that I would know what it was. But if I made the notes so shorthand that I don't know, I feel like I would be doing you all a disservice by not writing some of the words out. So, 2 paragraphs, a relatively short passage. Let's tackle the questions and see what we get. Do note that of course, on the real GMAT, you won't know how many questions you have coming, but you probably should prepare every passage as if you might get 6. Because if you read the passage that thoroughly, you'll be able to move through the questions more quickly. So, number 36, the passage is primarily concerned with. So, primarily concerned with is one of those main idea or big picture questions. And whenever possible, when you're done reading a passage, you should just take a moment to ask yourself, was the author trying to convince me of something or simply explain something? That will often allow you to eliminate some wrong answer choices. So let's just go down the list and see what we have. And again, I do always go through the wrong answer choices because it is a very valuable GMAT skill to recognize wrong answer choices by their construction. And learning how they create wrong answer choices is almost as valuable as finding the right answer choices right away, because process of elimination is one of the strategies. Anyway, was the passage primarily concerned with A, contrasting the benefits of one methodology with the benefits of another? And so there was no contrast in this one. We did find out that this particular author feels that oral narratives are right up there with written narratives, and they aren't really contrasted. In fact, the second paragraph talks about how they have the same types of dangers, or same types of not really flaws, but things that you have to take into account. So it's not going to be that there wasn't really any contrasting. In fact, it was more comparing and showing how they're similar. B, describing the historical origins and inherent drawbacks of a particular methodology. There were no historical origins of either the written or the oral narrative stuff, so it's not that. C, discussing the appeal of a particular methodology and some concerns about its use. So that does sound good. We described in the first paragraph how using oral narratives can be a valuable piece of the puzzle in piecing together an account of women's experience. And then the second paragraph is about some of the problems that has. So we're going to keep that one as a good answer choice in the running. D, showing that some historians' adoption of a particular methodology has led to criticism of recent historical scholarship. No, that's not remotely right. And E, analyzing the influence of current feminist views on women's interpretations of their experience. Well, we don't really have current feminist views in there. And we certainly don't analyze their influence. I guess maybe I shouldn't have dismissed D so thoroughly. I feel I suddenly had this image of someone out there watching this saying, "Oh, I picked D, and I don't know why it's not that." So I probably should explain. There's nothing in the passage about historians adopting that the oral narratives as part of women's history. And so we also don't hear anything about criticism of recent historical scholarship, so that's why it wasn't D. Anyway, that brings us back to answer choice C, discussing the appeal of a particular methodology and some concerns about its use. And we're going to go with erasing so that I can keep the notes up there as an example, especially since some people come in late. All right, so question number 37. And the pen is working now, so we will not be canceling the broadcast today, which is good because I didn't really want to. So number 37, according to the passage, which of the following shapes the oral narratives of women storytellers? And so according to the passage means it's a detail from within the passage, something the author does actually state explicitly. So we will find our evidence in the passage. And the part where, just from our, from our notes and from our memory, we remember that the things that shape an oral narrative were in the second paragraph, where we talked about how, or where it talked about how, it's prone to the same individual bias, and on top of that is also shaped by, like we wrote here, the way that people tell stories in a particular culture and in a particular time and all that will affect the way they tell these stories. So our answer choice would be something like that, something like one of those two things shaping the oral narratives of women storytellers. So, A, the conventions for standard histories in the culture in which a woman storyteller lives. Well, the whole passage is about how women's written narratives and women's oral narratives differ from standard histories. And unless that woman who is telling the story orally is also a big reader of standard histories, no, it would not be the conventions for standard histories that shape the way she tells a story. So that can't be it. B, the conventions of storytelling in the culture in which a woman storyteller lives. So we actually have this in line 17, where it says, moreover, the stories people tell to explain themselves are shaped by narrative devices and storytelling conventions, as well as by other cultural and historical factors in ways that the storytellers may be unaware of. So that was one of our predictions, that it would be the shaped by oral storytelling devices. So this is almost certainly the right answer. Let's double check after I make my happy face. C, a woman storyteller's experience with distinctive traditions of storytelling developed by the women in her family of origin. We don't have anything about women's family of origin there. So while it is possible that her oral storytelling techniques, that she tells stories the same way her mother or her grandmother did, that's not in the passage. We need support from the passage for our answer choices. I'm doing a lot of gesturing even though you can't see me. Anyway, answer choice D, the cultural expectations and experiences of those who listen to oral narratives. The audience is not in here. This is all about the storyteller, so that's not it. And then E, a woman storyteller's familiarity with the stories that members of other groups in her culture tell to explain themselves. That's beyond the scope of the passage. We don't hear about women telling or worrying about or really in any way related to women in other groups or members of other groups in her culture. So it's not that. And so B was the one that sounded awesome when we found it. It continues to be awesome and correct. All right. And we move on to the next page, but still the same passage. So it's going to take me a little bit longer to erase. Okay. So page 375, question number 38. So the author of the passage would be most likely to make which of the following recommendations to scholars of women's history? So these author would be most likely to do X, Y, or Z. These are inference questions, so it's something that we have to, I was going to say make a guess, but that's a little bit too inexact for what's going on. We need to draw a conclusion about what the author thinks from what the author has said, but the author will not have stated explicitly in the passage the answer to the question that we have. But there will be adequate support for whatever that is. So, would the author recommend to scholars of women's history that A, they should take into account their own life experiences when interpreting the oral accounts of women's historical experiences? No. And as a matter of fact, the author believes, like it's line 12, scholars of women's history should, however, be as cautious about accepting oral narratives at face value as they already are about written memories. So, which is to say, they need to, whenever possible, take into account the storyteller's life experiences. Taking into account their own life experiences is more or less irrelevant, unless they're writing some kind of personal reaction to this stuff. So, The scholars of women's history doesn't really matter. Their own life experiences don't matter for the purposes of the passage. The life experiences of the storytellers, however, do matter. Anyway, it's not A. B. They should assume that the observations made in women's oral narratives are believed by the intended audience of the story. We don't hear anything about the intended audience, so, it's not B. C. They should treat skeptically observations reported in oral narratives unless the observations can be confirmed in standard histories. So this is one of those half right, half wrong answer choices where it starts off sounding very good and very likely. Yes, they absolutely should be skeptical of observations reported in oral narratives. But really, it's more based on the life experiences of the individual storyteller, not the confirmation of things from standard histories. In fact, the whole point is these written and oral narratives can tell stories that simply don't appear in standard histories, and so that's what makes them so valuable. So it's not C. D. They should consider the cultural and historical context in which an oral narrative was created before arriving at an interpretation of such a narrative. Right, and that was part of the sentence I was reading before, actually starting like line 15. Oral narratives are no more likely than are written narratives to provide a disinterested commentary on events or people. Disinterested does not mean uninterested, it just means unbiased. So and then the whole rest of it is the cultural and historical context as well. So they're not unbiased, and they are stuck in their own culture. So D sounds pretty good. Let's check E. They should rely on information gathered from oral narratives only when equivalent information is not available in standard histories. Again, even though they provide fill in the gaps, these oral and written histories, sometimes they do overlap with standard histories. So they can be used in both cases, and it's not E. So answer choice D, telling them that they should just kind of be careful and consider the context. That is the right answer. Okay. Number 39. Which of the following best describes the function of the last sentence of the passage? So we should go back and read that last sentence just so that we can refamiliarize ourselves with it and recognize the right answer when we see it. So it starts at line 24. Thus, a woman who views the Second World War as pivotal in increasing the social acceptance of women's paid work outside the home may reach that conclusion partly and unwittingly because of wartime rhetoric encouraging a positive view of women's participation in such work. Okay, so that was kind of a specific example of the cultural context thing and how women storytellers, they saw one too many "we can do it" poster, and that's the way they think of their role in World War II. So let's look for something like that in the answers. A. It describes an event that historians view as crucial in recent women's history. Some probably do, but that's not why the author includes that there. There's nothing to suggest that that's what the author was hoping to get across. B. It provides an example of how political rhetoric may influence the interpretations of experience reported in women's oral narratives. That sounds exactly like what it was. It was an example of how the times may affect, what was going on at the time may affect how people think of whatever it was that was going on then. Let's check the other ones. C. It provides an example of an oral narrative that inaccurately describes women's experience during a particular historical period. It may have been inaccurate for some women, but that, again, was not the point of that example. D. It illustrates the point that some women are more aware than others of the social forces that shape their oral narratives. There's nothing there that says that some women at the time realized that they were being influenced. Again, that almost certainly was true. Somebody must have thought of it at the time, but that's not in the passage. So again, the evidence for what the function of something is doing will be from within the passage. And then E, it identifies the historical conditions that led to the social acceptance of women's paid work outside the home. Again, it did play a big part in that, but that was also a function of the rhetoric. So that's also not it. So it is, in fact, B, an example of how the political rhetoric at the time could change how a woman views her own situation. So B is the correct answer. It's a check mark for being right also. Two more. Question number 40. According to the passage, scholars of women's history should refrain from doing which of the following? Refrain from means not do, like stop doing. So scholars of women's history should stop doing which of the following? A, relying on traditional historical sources when women's oral narratives are unavailable. Well, that's ridiculous. That's what that is. There's no way that anyone would suggest that. When you have nothing else, you have to go with the traditional historical sources. B, focusing on the influence of political rhetoric on women's perceptions to the exclusion of other equally important factors. So this is one that, again, half right, half wrong, starts out very plausible sounding and correct. And so if someone reads halfway through this answer choice and says, oh, this looks great, I'm going to give it a smiley face, then they don't read the rest of the answer choice, and that's where it goes way off the rails. Scholars of women's history are supposed to focus on the influence of political rhetoric. That's what the example of that Second World War thing at the end was. But they're not supposed to do it to the exclusion of other equally important factors. You want to also pay attention to the other equally important factors. So B, not it. C, attempting to discover the cultural and historical factors that influence the stories women tell. So that's what the scholars of women's history are supposed to do. So this is, I suppose, a trap answer for those who don't read the question very carefully. The question is asking what they're supposed to stop doing, what they're supposed to refrain from doing, not do. So they are supposed to restrain themselves from attempting to so the question is asking what are they supposed to stop doing, and answer choice C is what they are supposed to start doing. So C is in fact 180 degree the opposite of what we're after here, and that's totally not C. Are they supposed to refrain from assuming that the conventions of women's written... this is D. Did I say that already? They're supposed to refrain from assuming that the conventions of women's written autobiographies are similar to the conventions of women's oral narratives. No, in fact, it actually says that that they have a lot of similarities. That's what the whole first half of the second paragraph is about, that they're prone to exactly the same thing. In some cases, the conventions are the same, and in some cases, the conventions are different. So there's nothing in the passage to support that they're supposed to stop doing that, which leaves us with answer choice E. Are they supposed to refrain from accepting women's oral narratives less critically than they accept women's written histories? Yes, that's what they're supposed to do. So even though they are very valuable things, it's line 12, basically, and following. Scholars of women's history should, however, be as cautious about accepting oral narratives at face value as they already are about written memories. That is to say, don't be less critical. That's what the author says, and that's what answer choice E is also saying. So, E it is. Last one on women's oral historical narratives. Number 41. Okay, according to the passage, each of the following is a difference between women's oral narratives and most standard histories except. So, of course, with these except questions, we have to be extra careful because all of the wrong answer choices will look like right things. They will look like things that actually did occur in the passage because they will be. So we're looking for the thing that did not occur. So difference between women's oral narratives and standard histories. A. Women's oral histories validate the significance of women's achievements. Actually, let's just go back and reread what these things do for us, because this was mentioned at the very beginning of the passage. Such narratives, unlike most standard histories, this is where they're contrasted, such narratives, unlike most standard histories, represent experience from the perspective of women, affirm the importance of women's contributions, and furnish present-day women with historical continuity that is essential to their identity, individually and collectively. So that's line 5, 6, starting at the end of line 6 in the first paragraph. Okay, so validate the significance of women's achievements. That was where it said affirm the importance of women's contributions. So that's totally in the passage, so it's not the right answer. B, women's oral histories depict experience from the point of view of women. It did say that they represent experience from the perspective of women in line 7 and 8, so it's not B. C, women's oral histories acknowledge the influence of well-known women. Well, we don't actually hear anything about well-known women. So let's leave that one as a possible right answer. D, women's oral histories present today's women with a sense of their historical relationship to women of the past. So it said, furnish present-day women with historical continuity that is essential to their identity. So that sounds in the passage, so it's not the right answer. And then E, women's oral histories are crucial to the collective identity of today's women. And again, at the end of that sentence, it says that is essential to their identity individually and collectively. So that's also in the passage, leaving us only with answer choice C, the acknowledging of the influence of well-known women as something not in the passage. Again, it might be true, but it's not in the passage. So it's not right. Or it is right for this question. Okay, so goodbye, oral narratives. Hello, Asian American Studies textbooks. So we are now on page 376, question number 42. So I will give you 4 minutes for this one, and I will take notes, you will take notes, or just read, and we will get to the questions in 4 minutes. Okay, we will stop there. Or, I mean, I will stop there. You can, of course, keep reading if you like, but I'm going to start talking about the questions. So, basically the overall situation. Overall, there's been a shift from not having any textbooks on Asian American, about authors or just textbooks for survey courses, and now there are so many that it's hard to know what's good, and so people who are selecting textbooks for courses are a little bit lost. What's also missing then from according to paragraph 2 are even with all the books that are out there, one volume references that give people something to refer to instead of having to read 10 books to get the same background knowledge. If there were a one volume reference, there would be a book that people could just go look something up in, like a one volume encyclopedia of important things, and then the professor or instructor creating the course could concentrate on selecting books for other reasons other than providing necessary background. So, and then the question we always want to ask ourselves is the author trying to convince us of something? And mostly no. I mean, while the author does talk about how nice it would be to have one of these one volume references out there, or one or more of them, the author isn't saying that anyone should do something. The author is simply saying that this is missing, and there's a difference there. So, okay. Let's take a look at the answer choices, or the question first. I didn't actually read it yet. So question number 42, the author of the passage is primarily concerned with doing which of the following? So this is a main idea question. A, recommending a methodology. There's not a methodology. A methodology is a way of doing something. The author is not, first off, the author isn't recommending. We could actually kind of ignore this answer choice based on the first word because the author wasn't advocating a particular course of action. But on top of that, a methodology is definitely not recommended. B, describing a course of study. We don't find out about a course of study. C, discussing a problem. There is a problem. There's too many textbooks and not enough of the right kind of textbooks. So that's pretty good, actually. We will leave you as a possible answer choice C. And D, evaluating a past course of action. Again, it's not a course of action that we're looking at here. And E, responding to a criticism. There is no criticism in this passage, really. So that leaves us with answer choice C, discussing a problem, namely the nature of the books available on Asian American studies. So let us move on to number 43. The dilemma mentioned in line 3 can best be characterized as being caused by the necessity to make a choice when faced with a blank. Now, of course, we could just look at the answer choices. Whenever they give you a line citation, I really recommend going back and reading that line citation, even if you feel like you have a pretty good idea of what it was about, because sometimes it will hinge on the actual wording or the implications thereof. So let's just go back, and since I'm the one in charge of the broadcast, I'm going to make us go back and read line 3. So in recent years, teachers of introductory courses in Asian American Studies have been facing a dilemma non-existent a few decades ago when hardly any texts in that field were available. And so that sentence actually only tells us what was going on in the past when there were no textbooks available or hardly any texts. So to get to the dilemma, it's actually the next sentence. Today, excellent anthologies and other introductory texts exist, and books on individual Asian American nationality groups and on general issues important for Asian Americans are published almost weekly. So this is the split or the change mentioned in my notes here for paragraph 1. Before there were no textbooks, now there's so many. So the dilemma has to do with choosing. So they are, the dilemma is the necessity to make a choice when faced with a lack of acceptable alternatives. That's what was true before. The dilemma is what they face today. So A would be the answer you would choose if you didn't pay attention to the context. B, Is it making a choice when faced with a lack of strict standards for evaluating alternatives? Well, there aren't usually strict standards anyway, so that's definitely not talked about. C, preponderance of bad alternatives as compared to good. Preponderance means majority, or yeah, that there's more bad alternatives as compared to good. But no, there's nothing about them being bad, so that's not it. Make a choice when faced with a multitude of different alternatives. So that's where we have the so many choices and not sure what's good. This sounds great. And then E, large number of alternatives that are nearly identical in content. We do have a large number of alternatives, but actually from the sound of things, there's anthologies, introductory texts, things on particular nationality groups. So it sounds like there is actually a variety of texts out there rather than nearly identical ones. So it's not E, leaving us with the multitude of different alternatives, which we supposed from our notes, or from our memory of the passage if you didn't take notes. D it is. And now we move on to page 377. 377. Question number 44. The passage suggests that the factor mentioned in lines 15 to 18 complicates professors' attempts to construct introductory reading lists for courses in Asian American Studies in which of the following ways? Okay, so the factor mentioned in lines 15 to 18, I do not have the passage committed to memory. I need to go back and refresh my memory. Your mileage may vary. Line 15, a complicating factor has been the continuing lack of specialized one-volume reference works on Asian Americans, such as biographical dictionaries or desktop encyclopedias. So, and the reason that complicated things is that for introductory courses, because there are multiple, hopefully this isn't news to you, there are multiple Asian American groups out there. Asia is not one country. So in order to cover all the different backgrounds of all the different cultures, professors, we find out from the passage, are faced with either having to pick things that are really easy and introductory and don't refer to a lot of background culture stuff, or they are required to assign additional primary sources that explain cultural backgrounds to the readings that they really wanted to talk about. So that's what we're looking for. That's how professors constructing reading lists, that's how their life is complicated. Let's look for that in the answer choices. A, by making it difficult for professors to identify primary source material and to obtain standard information on Asian American history and culture. Well, no. I mean, in fact, it sounds like there's plenty of books out there, and just the lack of a one-volume encyclopedia is not preventing them from identifying primary source material. Primary source material is stuff written in, typically in the original language or translated, but it's not somebody commenting on the original stuff. B, does it complicate it by preventing professors from identifying excellent anthologies and introductory texts in the field that are both recent and understandable to students? No, that sounds closer though. The issue is that the lack of a one-volume reference book requires them to either assign a bunch of reading and then assign harder stuff, or they have to choose the things that are really understandable by students because there is no one-volume encyclopedia. It's not B. C, by preventing professors from adequately evaluating the quality of the numerous texts currently being published in the field. So the number of texts out there does prevent them from keeping up on it, but that's not the factor mentioned in lines 15 to 18. The factor is the lack of a one-volume encyclopedia, which wouldn't really talk about how good various books are anyway, so it's not C. Does it make it more necessary for professors to select readings for their courses that are not too challenging for students unfamiliar with Asian American history and culture? Yes. So that was the point. They either have to choose easy books, or if they choose harder books that require more background knowledge, they have to assign all the reading that gives the students the background knowledge. So this sounds great. Let's check out E. By making it more likely that the readings professors assign to students in their courses will be drawn solely from primary sources. Well, that doesn't really complicate things, and in fact, a lot of it should be from primary sources. That's kind of the whole point of studies courses. Um, and the lack of a one-volume encyclopedia doesn't. I guess it does make it more likely that they'll be drawn solely from primary sources, but that's not really a complication. So it's not E. It is, in fact, answer choice D. Number 45. The passage implies that which of the following was true of introductory courses in Asian American studies a few decades ago. So remember, a few decades ago, it sounded like there were almost no books. So we're going to want something like that. A, the range of different textbooks that could be assigned for such courses was extremely limited. That sounds pretty good. Let's keep going. The texts assigned as readings in such courses were often not very challenging for students. There's nothing that suggests that about readings a few decades ago. C, students often complained about the texts assigned to them in such courses. Those of you familiar with college at all, it turns out actually that the students complain about the texts no matter how many there are. So while potentially true for C, that's not going to be the right answer. D, such courses were offered only at schools whose libraries were rich in primary sources. The passage definitely does not imply that. There were books available, just not many. And then E, such courses were the only means then available by which people in the United States could acquire knowledge of the field. That's, well, it's ridiculous. I mean, that's one of those extreme answers that, really, an Asian American Studies course is the only way people in the United States could find out things about Asian Americans? Asian Americans being in the United States? Yeah, okay. It's not E, so that leaves us with answer choice A. That the range of different textbooks that could be assigned for such courses was extremely limited. Because it actually says, in recent years, teachers of introductory courses in Asian American Studies have been facing a dilemma non-existent a few decades ago when hardly any texts in that field were available. If hardly any texts were available, the range of textbooks must have been extremely limited. All right. Last one on this passage, and then we will stop for the day. Number 46. According to the passage, the existence of good one-volume reference works about Asian Americans could result in. So this is the part where we found out about how it could cut down on the amount of primary reading that was meant as background and provide background for tougher stuff. That's what the second paragraph was about. So let's look for something like that in the answer choices. A, increased agreement among professors of Asian American Studies regarding the quality of the sources available in their field. While quality and figuring out what's good was something that happened in the passage, that was the first paragraph, and wasn't related to the one-volume reference question. Answer choice B, an increase in the number of students signing up for introductory courses in Asian American Studies. Well, I suppose that's possible, but it's not something that is expressed or implied by the passage. C, increased accuracy in writings that concern Asian American history and culture. Hopefully everything that's out there is accurate even without a one-volume reference. You would hope that publishers would do some fact-checking. So no, that's not what the passage said. D, the use of introductory texts about Asian American history and culture in courses outside the field of Asian American Studies. So that actually is possible, but it's not something the passage really says. I mean, it does say, in line 20, it says, such works would enable students taking Asian American Studies courses and professors in related fields to look up basic information on Asian American individuals. So there is a little bit of a hint there that it would be useful to people outside the Asian American Studies field, but it doesn't go so far as to say that the introductory texts about Asian American history and culture would be used in courses outside of Asian American studies. So it's just a little bit of a stretch, answer choice D. If anything, this should be the only tempting wrong answer choice, but it is wrong. It is actually E. I gave it away. E says the inclusion of a wider range of Asian American material in introductory reading lists in Asian American studies. So that's line 24. It says, in addition, given such works, Asian American studies professors might feel more free to include more challenging Asian American material in their introductory reading lists, since good reference works allow students to acquire on their own the background information necessary to interpret difficult or unfamiliar material. So if some professors are including more challenging Asian American material, that increases the range of material that would appear on an introductory reading list. Therefore, the inclusion of a wider range of material, like it says in answer choice E, is the correct answer. Okay, so that was good. I'm going to double check the Facebook, or check the video page just to make sure there aren't any comments from any of you. That's one of the advantages of finishing a little bit early. I can see whether anybody has said anything. Nope, okay. This concludes the broadcast day for today. We will, of course, be back tomorrow. We are going to pick up on page 378. And yeah, we'll start there. So you've been watching Grockit's OGTV, Grockit.com. This is the GMAT edition where we go through the 12th edition to the guide to the test, page by page, question by question, cover to cover. And again, we're in the reading comprehension section, so we have moved on to verbal. My name's Jim Jacobson. I have been your instructor, and unless I'm sick, I will be your instructor again tomorrow. So, thanks for joining us, and see you next time.